Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Podge from the Two Man Power Trip. And of course, joining me is my co-host, the wizard himself, Mr. Trump Mania, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, I'm doing great. Today is a special day. One of our favorite guests, and our probably we're going to talk about quantitative things today. So our second most appearances on WrestleNomics, Brandon Thurston. But if you count Brent Lauderdale being from Western New York originally, and Brandon, we're far ahead in the region. Welcome, Brandon.
Hi guys, what's up?
Brandon Thurston, BTZ, as I like to call you, you kind of made some waves not that long ago at the press conference, because to me, which I always laugh at those things, because it's very kayfabe, like Austin Theory's doing kayfabe. You come up and actually ask like a real question. You know what I mean? Like the other questions aren't necessarily not to be against any of the other guys, but some of those other questions are a little kind of worked, I guess you could say. Or they're asking Triple H, hey, what do you think about Ripley versus Charlotte Flair in WrestleMania? Whatever. But you actually asked a real good question, and you were asking about the sale. Any sort of interesting backlash or positive reviews for WrestleNomics, like coming from that? Because it's almost like, oh, who asked that an actual good question, and they like go to WrestleNomics. You know what I mean? Did you get some positive stuff out of that, or did you get any backlash out of that?
I didn't get any backlash that I'm aware of. I uh, I did get a lot of messages and people saying nice things. I don't know. I think the whole thing is kind of silly that it's that I guess that question was perceived as something that was so out of the norm or worthy of compliments. I got no problems from WWE. Everybody at WWE was very nice to me. I don't I don't know what I can't speak for WWE, but I don't think that they don't want things like that. There are some other questions that I could have asked that I think are legitimate questions that maybe they would have had a problem with in that setting, but I don't. And I should mention too, like I had trouble finding the press conference. I sat down about 5 minutes before I asked that question, at which point the press conference was maybe more than half over, which I didn't realize until after it was over. So they had every reason. They helped me find the press conference. I was texting someone from PR, and they had every reason to blow me off and not make sure that I asked a question. And they seemed to make sure that I asked a question, which I appreciate.
To me, though, a lot of those questions are, they're just like kind of a part of the show. But your question was good and substantial because it's like, of course, you have to ask Triple H what he thinks about the sale because I feel like that was on everybody's mind. It's almost like, oh, somebody asking about the sale. You finally asked him. So to me, that's just a great question that I think that everybody at home, me as the viewer, like was like, oh man, somebody's got to ask him about the sale. I mean, this is huge news, nine
Yeah,
billion dollar news here.
and I'm not a experienced journalist. I'm learning on the job here, so I don't know if I was an experienced journalist how I would feel about it. I mean, one of my co-hosts at WrestleNomics Radio, Jesse Collins, he has very strong opinions about how there should be more serious questions asked. So I don't know what the mindset is of everybody else. Most of them are experienced. There are they're from newspapers and more mainstreamish publications. So I don't know if everybody is. It is a very unusual situation. It's pro wrestling. You're doing a pro wrestling press conference with where the sport is a work sport. It's a predetermined sport. This is not football or MMA or something. So this is a different situation. And I grew up watching Japanese wrestling tapes where after the match, and still to this day, you'd have a press conference. And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't speak Japanese, so I don't know what was being said. So, and I don't know how those reporters operated. But it's just a weird situation where I guess people don't know maybe quite how to act, or maybe they don't know what good questions there would be along the lines of I guess business related things, which is what I happen to be interested in. So yeah, hopefully as time goes on, it'll get more ironed out, and there'll be more interesting questions and interesting responses.
Great question there. Loved it. John Pollock, who I know we all know and love, obviously, he had a good question too, but he didn't get a Triple H question. I don't think. I think he was for Rhea Ripley. So I mean, it or forget who. No, it was maybe towards Edge and Beth Phoenix. But anyway, outside of the press conference, WrestleNomics is growing. The media mentions are crazy. The social media mentions are crazy. What do you feel like about the growth of WrestleNomics? Because you guys interviewing Jericho, CM Punk is retweeting you guys. What do you think about the growth of WrestleNomics?
like as far as I saw this in the pre-show notes. I'm aware that CM Punk shared something on Instagram. I was on Jericho's podcast. I don't always know, I guess, when people are interacting with WrestleNomics online. Usually it does come around and I find out about it.
The Punk
But
thing was
like,
great. Yeah. Yep.
but like I don't, when I send a tweet, it's like it's wired into my automatic nervous system to mute the tweet and to try to avoid reading the replies. Now it's important to have feedback and stuff, but especially when it comes to the ratings, the replies to my ratings tweets, when I see them these days, they're just insane.
Yeah, they're awful.
It's a lot of people, and I guess I've reflected on it. It's like I guess I'm kind of like the referee in the football game here, and nobody likes the referee when they because inevitably they're going to make a call against your team, and that's what we have here is some people are rooting for Team WWE and some people are rooting for Team AEW. And it brings to mind, I was trying to explain to somebody the other day, and I've explained this to my mom, in fact, once, like trying to explain to her, well, sometimes people think I'm very biased, and she'll be like, what? But all you do is report data, you just report numbers. Like, how could that, well, I'm trying to figure out like what a good analogy is, and I still have to decide what's worth focusing on. I still have to decide like what the first sentence in the article should be, for example. I still have to decide, what will really set people off is if you compare a viewership number from one company to another. If you say, for example, when it was closer, Dynamite beat Raw in 1849, which has happened on like 4 occasions. And if you post like the further demo breakdown of comparing demos against each other, that's where people will really get upset. So you ultimately have to decide what's important to focus on. I still have to do analysis. I could throw a bunch of numbers out there without context, and I don't think that would be better. I think that would be
Worse.
more useless.
Yeah.
A number without context, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think if you're a new reader, especially if you're not following the numbers every day and you don't have a log of what the ratings were for the last 4 weeks and so on. And it's just a bunch of numbers, I'm not a big fan of the headlines covering wrestling ratings where they just say SmackDown up, Raw down. Like what? You're comparing against the prior week. What was the prior week? Was that an especially good number or not? And without like I said, like a back record of context in your own head, these headlines are kind of meaningless to me, or misleading at worst.
When you look at like,
I was way off the track of your question, John. Sorry.
but I love it. But getting onto what you were saying though, when you look at that though, and you say like, hey, Roman Reigns, right now,
is he a draw?
Is he a draw? Like, is he the rating guy? Like, and then you'll see someone else be like, well, Moxley means more to AEW than Reigns means to WWF, like, or WWE, excuse me. But what do you think? Like, is he the draw, or are we looking too specifically at certain things in time where it's like, no, Cena popped a rating, yeah, but Reigns versus Riddle did more, did a higher. Like, is Reigns a draw?
Yes, I think he is. Yeah, I think. Some of this is chicken and egg, but okay. Before we go there,
Yeah.
When I look at, certainly when I look at web search, for what that's worth. I think when you look at web search over the long term, I think it's worth. It tells you quite a bit. When I look at what the most watched YouTube clips are for WWE, particularly I prefer to focus on the clips from their TV shows, Raw and SmackDown. It's dominated by Roman Reigns, and I don't think, maybe if Lesnar was full time, it would be really close to the results that I see with Reigns, but because, as we know, Lesnar is not there year round, it's more so Roman Reigns. Now, TV ratings, do I see him popping quarter hours a lot? Maybe. It's harder to say, and I think quarter hours are just a mess to look at, and it's really weird that like people are so interested in the quarter hours, and I think they tell a very unclear story that's marred by a number of factors, and maybe that's part of the appeal is that you can get almost any story or excuse any story when you look at the quarter hours, because there's so many external factors involved, including ad breaks, including the arbitrary 15-minute time slot where there's other content involved, including what else was on TV at the moment. But yeah, is Roman Reigns a draw? He's WWE's biggest draw full time. It's obviously we just saw Cena drew like an extra 2,000 ticket sales apparently for the Raw coming up in Boston, but John Cena's only there a couple times a year. Lesnar might be in the conversation if he was more full time, and maybe if you want to think about it like that, if you want to exclude that full time factor, then maybe you could say that Lesnar was a bigger draw. But I think certainly at this point, Reigns is a strong attraction for WWE, and we can have an argument about whether the investment is worth the return. About Reigns and how much effort was put in to get him over, and maybe some of that investment could have been put into other talent that was dedicatedly put into him. And I think that's a worthwhile conversation to have. But here we are in 2023, and I think Roman Reigns is WWE's biggest star and strongest box office attraction. Yeah.
Back to WrestleNomics. Talk about just the growth. I had to get off a little bit of the path there, but just the growth of WrestleNomics, Patreon, YouTube, social media wise. Just talk about the growth. Have you seen a big growth from you guys? Because it seems like you're popping up everywhere. Like everybody's using you as a source now, so it seems like you are certainly growing.
Yeah, the Patreon continues to do well. Subscribers are growing. It grows a lot on Thursdays when the Dynamite rating comes out. Like yesterday was a very good day for WrestleNomics Patreon subscribers.
Nice.
Yeah, I think when there's an unusual rating, an especially good Dynamite rating or an especially bad Dynamite rating, there's increased interest. But the subscribers have continued to grow. I am of course tracking all the business aspects very closely. I operate and finance the business by myself. It's just me. I did start an LLC early this year, so now my taxes will be very, very complicated. But
Yes.
it's continuing to do well. I I guess because we're doing something that is, I don't know, just make it like a really basic economics lesson. We're doing something that has a low supply and a sufficient demand. Where this is a very small, narrow niche. The business is like a niche within that, right?
Yep.
You guys are especially covering the companies that are just underneath WWE and AEW and New Japan. But no, it's not a full-time job for me, at least not yet. But I'm very fortunate to have a good audience and people who take interest in what we do, and who knows where the growth will stop. When I do my books, I'm like, I don't know what to estimate for next month, but it's continuing to grow little by little. Not a ton, but there's 390 or so subscribers right now, so we're doing okay.
Nice. It's funny when you say about the Dynamite rating, because the week before was 824, which was really bad.
Yeah.
And then I looked at Rampage, was 287. Horrible time slot. It was before the NBA All-Star
preemptive,
Game
yeah.
weekend. So, I mean, all things considered, it was a terrible number. But, I mean, I could throw out an excuse, and people are like, oh, that's an excuse. But it's a fact. It was a terrible time slot in front of a basketball, not even a basketball game. It was like a little fun, whatever the hell they call All-Star Weekend festivities. So then you figure, oh, Dynamite this week's going to be terrible. Like on paper, I was like, man, that's not a strong main event. What's going to happen? And then $200,000 people bump. It's over 1 million. How do you can you even kind of figure that out and kind of track where that came from? Like, why the big leap after being down for God knows what reason the week before?
I don't know. Well, there's no NBA. There was college basketball on ESPN, but there's usually NBA on ESPN. There was no NBA on ESPN on Wednesday night. The Rampage number was a preemption. It was at 7 o'clock, and it was the lowest Rampage that there's ever been. But it was usually I would just dismiss it, but there have been 3 other previous examples of Rampage at 7 that did not quite double the viewership, but almost. And in fact, in the demo, it did do double the viewership, and in some cases more than double of what Rampage did on Friday. So I don't know what that's about. I think it's about the content, maybe. It's about the popularity of AEW and maybe people not going out of their way anymore to make sure that they catch Rampage. But Dynamite did much better than it did in the prior week. And maybe that's partly due to NBA. Maybe it's partly due to the content too, though. I don't know.
Lavie, I know you're chomping at the bit. What do you got for Brandon as far as maybe some MLW stuff?
Yeah. So, and want to acknowledge to our listeners that I had the pleasure of meeting Brandon in person for the
Oh,
first
that's right.
time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Brandon, not something I've actually done yet with John. So we're working there. We'll get there. Um, so, what's always fun of bringing you onto this program is that, of course, we love WrestleNomics, and everything nearly for WWE and AEW is covered A to Z. So we love to dive a little bit deeper in some of the other territories or promotions that multiple hours just don't allow for. So we're very young in the MLW ratings, and you've been the one basically blessing the internet with these ratings. And you actually revealed the BN Sports mystery ratings, which it seemed at the end it was kind of about 2,000 to 10,000, depending on the last
You
numbers
remember better than I do, of course. I have to look it up.
which were coming out. But with Underground, just like qualitatively, like have the numbers surprised you so far? Like, what were you expecting?
I don't know if I gave it that much thought. You think about this stuff much more than I do, Lavi. What were you expecting?
I thought it could go either way. Okay, so here's why. One is that Reels is a much higher rated network, although the cops television show, which John always has to remind me the name of, On Patrol every week, is the one spiking the rating. So while it's a 200,000 person average in 2022, it's really, if you factor that out, it's much lower. Uh, but it's a less established promotion. Whereas when you have Access TV, Impact, and New Japan, they're very well established. So I thought it could be high because they were promoting every half an hour. There was an on-screen bug and a commercial, um, and it was a higher rated network, but it was less established. So I was a little bit conservative, probably towards the like New Japan on Access number.
Yeah.
So when it came in, that was interesting. It was sort of like not too far off, but week 3 here we see almost 100,000. Um, and I think that it's somewhat surprising, but I think not, because it's a very watchable hour. I think the production hopefully will get better as they tape specifically for Reels. But most people aren't aware that it exists, right? If you're not watching Reels and you're not in pro wrestling media, if you're not tuned into any of these resources, how do you even know? So that's my spiel on that.
Yeah, I guess I think New Japan is a good comparison for what this show is doing, for what MLW is doing, because they're both at 10, which was a tougher time slot than 8 or 9. And Access TV and Reels are in a similar number of homes, right? They're both in, what did I report? I'd have to look at my report, 40 million homes, something like that, about half the cable homes. So they have a similar amount of coverage. You might know better, Lavi. Reels is a stronger network in terms of average viewership than Access is. Is that right?
Like much higher though.
Much,
It was
much
200
stronger.
200,000 average in 2022, whereas um, Access is, I don't know it offhand, but it was like multiples,
Yeah.
of it.
So maybe that's playing in somewhat in helping MLW, which is doing much better than New Japan is doing, right? Um, we do have these replays because they replayed it at 1 a.m. A reader pointed out to me yesterday that actually Impact and New Japan are both being replayed later in the night on Access TV, and we're not. I'm never reporting that. I don't have that data. So, we should. I guess we should really just be focusing on the first airing if we're going to be comparing Impact and New Japan in this case. But I guess it's doing okay. Who knows what the deal is between Reels and MLW? Is it an ad revenue share? I would at this level of viewership, I would guess so. It seems like it's doing okay, and it's improved. The third episode was the most watched, so we'll see what happens.
So I'm just looking at the Variety 2022 list. So Reels was number 51, 252,000 viewers, an increase of 107% to do something like that. Access TV is number 1,000, and they lost
Is he breaking up for you too, John?
Lavie, you're breaking up on us.
13.
Oh, he's still going. He's rattling off those
Yeah,
numbers.
he's still going. Maybe he doesn't hear us. He's right. He loves those MLW numbers. That's why he's got them. Oh,
And he's gone.
he's gone. Yeah, the MLW. I was surprised. Just I know obviously he knows them way more in depth than I do. I was just surprised it went up because usually when you have a show like that and it debuts and it does 79, you're like, okay, all right, and that's going to be where it is. Went up to almost 100. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen sort of the same thing happen with WoW in syndication, where WoW started below 300 and is now, I mean, for I think we're at 8 weeks or so in a row. We're a little bit behind when it comes to WoW, but we're about 8 weeks in a row where WoW is doing now over 300 and doing better than it was before. So I mean, and maybe people are discovering the show somewhat, and maybe that's adding to the viewership.
So I got too ambitious. Usually, I keep everything in the show notes. So when I clicked on Variety, that threw
Okay.
me off. So, i- is there and hopefully I didn't miss this, but in terms of WoW talk, is there
I
any
didn't go too far,
impact?
Lavie. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Is there any impact in the world, in the universe, if this week, and I don't think it's come out yet, Brandon, you might be working on it. If the WoW syndication rating beats the Rampage rating, does this mean anything, or is this just something I'm following?
Well, what do you mean when you say beats it? Like in the same week?
Yes.
And you want, are we talking about Rampage in preemption as it was
So
this?
it wouldn't be fair this week, but that would be probably its first win, its easiest win. But let's say in a regular time slot, 1 week, Rampage does 310, WoW comes in and does 330,000.
What happens then? Then
Yes.
then one number will be higher than the other.
Right.
But I think
Is
it
there a
would speak,
perception?
maybe. I mean, how many people are following this data? If I wasn't reporting WoW TV ratings, we probably wouldn't know about them at all. It means something to WoW, I suppose. Maybe it means something to WBD. I mean, I think it would speak to the diminished value of Rampage, where Rampage really could have been. It could have been more valuable. It could have, it started out very, very strong in the summer of 2021, and one of the lessons of WWE's really good TV deal in 2018, I think, was that wow, they really strengthened SmackDown, did the brand split in 2016, and made what was kind of a B show in SmackDown throughout, we could say, the early 2010s and mid 2010s into a second A show, and got a lot more money for their TV rights than they would have otherwise if they hadn't strengthened it. NBC did their part in putting in better time slots and better networks too, but I think that was the opportunity for Rampage, and I mean Rampage isn't worthless, but it's worth less than it looked to be worth early on in the history of Rampage. But I think we can get to that when we talk about Ring of Honor too. But yeah, I think it would speak to the diminished value of Rampage.
So, you know, I talked about it, and I think at the same time you talked about it. Like, what's the third biggest promotion in the U.S.? And
Yes.
because most of them are on television now, that we can monitor it and judge it and so on. For a while, I think we both felt that there was an argument to say Game Changer Wrestling, but now I don't. Game Changer Wrestling has a totally different business model. So, like, if you were to look at metrics that are public, how do you determine like where Game Changer Wrestling is?
You said numbers that are public. So numbers that are not public are, for Game Changer Wrestling, are basically all of them, right? For most companies, it's all of them. Revenue would be the number. If I had access to every number in the world and every piece of proprietary information, revenue would be I guess the fairest. If we're talking about, if the name of the show is business, right? Then I guess we would want to know about revenue, or maybe ideally even profit, net income or something. But in lieu of that, and then we would want to know about media revenues, certainly in the U.S., because that is increasingly the biggest piece of revenue. So we're talking about things like, in the case of WWE, TV deals, pay-per-view sales, streaming subscriptions. But we don't know any of that in the case of anybody. I guess there's no more. I mean, we know what the Peacock number is. We don't really know what anybody's streaming subscribers really are. We've got some vague reports from New Japan about New Japan World. what's easier to figure out, not clearly, but at least it happens in public and people can see it with the naked eye, is ticket sales, right? And everybody, it's kind of an equalizer, ticket sales, right? Because everybody's running events, and the fact that somebody's willing to pay money to show up at your venue, that should indicate something about the strength of your business, right? And how is Game Changer doing in ticket sales? You would know better than I would, Lavie.
Yeah, so it's down. They had the momentum, and it really could swing. You could see like Los Angeles. There's a place they were running last year. I mean, they're still running the Ukrainian Culture Center. It was like pre-sell up, pre-sell. Then they did a double shot, and that was the first time for probably in a while they didn't sell the second show. And then it seemed like a little bit of oversaturation, whereas now like it's picking up. So it's a market to market thing. Atlantic City near John. There, when they have like big shows or it's the summer, like if there's a draw, they do well. But other times you could see like the day of, it's like third row available and so on. So it's a very market to market. I feel like, and in speaking to Brett, like, what's your focus? Everything, right? Like it's a small company, everything counts, whether it's ticket sales, pay-per-view, antiquated word, I guess, t-shirts or whatever. But I feel like it's harder to judge based on the ticket sales now because like Fight Plus is probably like the most important, thing.
Yeah. So who's the number three? Well, we say WAW, New Japan. I think we would agree are the top three, right?
Yes.
So who's number?
Well,
You wanted number three in the U.S. though, huh?
Right. Like when I think about the U.S., I think there's an argument for many. Like New Japan, right? Like at its biggest, and I think I have this in the notes. Like when they do that collaborative show with AEW, it seems like they'll do it annually now. I think that's like multiples of everything else that they do. In terms of like the revenue from the pay-per-view, from the ticket sales, everything else is like smaller. You could run a show in New York and have high ticket sales, but it's under 1,000, so you do well on that. Whatever they're getting from Access TV, they're getting, and now they're more careful with this with their U.S. strategy. So they have that. So at their biggest, New Japan has potentially the biggest. Impact has, they have their ownership. They have what were the highest ratings, depending on how it goes, for a non 1A brand in the US. They have the legacy, right? Like their searches, which you've helped me to, I don't fully have it yet, but helped me to get better at, are multiples of any other promotion of a similar level. They
in the
have
US.
the legacy media. So, but they can't draw, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what their pay-per-views are doing, but live they don't draw well. Then MLW is I don't think there's an argument there yet. There's the ratings, but it's been down a little bit. And then GCW is sort of its own thing. It's like it's not comparable because they're running all over the country. It's usually not a high attendance.
I guess can we isolate comparing MLW to Impact? Because I guess MLW's at this point, we're 3 episodes in, is doing comparable ratings at a worse time slot on a better network. So there's some offsetting values there. I mean, if you want to say it's too close to call, maybe, and maybe weeks and months will tell us what the real story is about ratings. But
right, yeah, like at the television ratings, you have that, but like there's no other like infrastructure that's built out in the way that
is MLW doing better with ticket sales than Impact though?
I'm curious. April will help us. I mean, those tickets are on sale already, but April will help us to get a better idea because they're in the Melrose Ballroom and then 2300 Arena. When you look at the 2300 Arena, when the map comes out, like you'll see like maybe it could have like 9 rows on one side, and it's like 6 of those are not for sale. So sometimes people will look at the end and be like, hey, they sold out or like they nearly sold out. But if you look at it closely, you can see like it doesn't appear that those tickets were ever on sale. So MLW used to do really well, like especially pre-pandemic or like Tony Khan hurting them. When they ran that like old venue in Chicago that looked great on television. that Impact's run now. 2300 Arena. John, I think you were at the one when they returned from the pandemic. That was sold out,
Yeah,
but
that was a lot of people. The one after that,
yeah,
a lot less.
yeah. Okay, so that's that. But Impact still is struggling, but they've taken the small wins in terms of like, um, you know, smaller venues or scheduling it, the logistics of it in such a way that like you could claim a sellout, and that's good for them.
If you put 10 tickets, not that they did this, but if you put 10 tickets on sale and sell 10 tickets, you can call it a sellout because you sold out your inventory, supposedly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's like they were doing that before that, but Lou D'Angeli signed Guy Dudley. I think like just following what he's doing, I feel like that there's some momentum building there. So I would give the live events win to Impact, and they're running a lot, even though they run a fairly limited schedule. They're running a lot more than MLW. MLW for a while also was doing a little bit, trying to team up with like lucha promotions, not just when they went to Mexico recently, but with the promotion there, but like in the U.S. But it just didn't. In Atlanta, Mucha Lucha Atlanta, that seemed to work out well. But something in Texas, like it was supposed to be a taping, and then they changed it and they pulled some talent, so it seemed like that was a mess.
So would you give New Japan in the United States as a ticket draw above either Impact or MLW?
With their
And we
current
have the recent show fresh in mind with Mercedes and whatnot, but and
at,
Tanahashi and
at
Okada.
at their highest level, no other secondary brand can touch them. But when they were at their lowest level, it was a disaster. Like, in Tampa or wherever in Florida, it was clearly just a few hundred tickets. So they're smartly not doing that anymore because it was that brand confusion. This is the show that we bring in the stars. This is the show where we don't have stars. This show we have some stars. So they're smartly saying, like, forget about that. We'll have our 5 US shows, and then they're teaming with Impact, so they'll have that modest win over WrestleCon. Whatever's happening, it appears from Spectrum Cable, right? Everyone's reporting on that listing. Wherever they'll be with AEW, that's another win for them. So I don't think it's like they already have the primary market. Why not come here and make it special, which they're sort of finally getting?
Yes, and have they run shows just as New Japan Strong in the U.S. other than like studio tapings?
Yes, and they've
Okay,
been mostly a disaster.
okay.
Like the Florida one comes to mind, but I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me. But like if they had Moxley or
You're
whatever, of
keeping a
course,
spreadsheet?
that they do well. But otherwise, when it's just like, hey, it's New Japan, then like that wasn't a draw, in and of itself.
Yes, but and I should name who was in it. It was Mercedes Monet and Kyrie, and as well as Tanahashi and Okada in major matches there, and that did how much again? I think 2,000 and change, right?
Yeah, it was
2,300.
WrestleTix was covering well. It's basically like they were off the board for a while, and then the tickets came back. Maybe they were going to be comped for somebody, but there was like 3 very expensive tickets that didn't sell. So some people, John was telling me last week that people were like, "Hey, they didn't sell out." But one thing to note about it is that it wasn't selling that well before Mercedes was announced. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't selling that well. And they announced on the broadcast, hey, now it's sold out. That wasn't true either, but you could see in the days and weeks ahead that it was like moved like really quickly. So she was the draw for that show that moved the ticket sales.
Okay.
So A&E, they seem more to be friends with WWE. So here's something no one's talked about, and Ben, I'm sorry if I missed it, and you did talk about it. If whoever buys the WWE, or if it remains, and the rights are up for Raw and SmackDown, does a network like A&E get in on the bidding?
When has A&E ever aired anything? You see, and so we're talking Raw and SmackDown. Obviously, they are airing W content right now. But when has A&E ever aired anything that's like a live sport? Has that ever happened?
I only know A&E in two faces, which I've joked about. One is it was a very classy network that no one watched. The second phase where I started watching it was when they started putting on these wrestling documentaries,
Is,
and
is that
people
where like the
started watching
James
it.
Lipton Inside the Actor Studio aired?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Like you couldn't tell the
Yes.
difference between like PBS and A&E, and then they're suddenly like doing WWE WWF price specials, right? Late '90s, early 2000s, and then like I don't know, did they have reality shows for a while? So no, it might not fit the profile, but they keep going in more on it.
I would say unless A&E is going to totally rebrand and relaunch, what it's about, that I would not expect A&E to get in on WWE Raw or SmackDown. I would be very surprised.
So switching gears a little bit. So when we thought, or I'm not sure if you ever believed it, but it was being reported, so I bought it, that Ring of Honor was sold for 40 million, 50 million, whatever it is. I started writing all these articles and talking about like how Impact um, should put itself on the market and could sell for similar or something like that, but it didn't seem it seemed to be inflated by like 10x. Um, that story. But with all the WWE talk for sale, whether it's 6.5 billion, 9 billion, does this raise the market value of any promotion? Like, if I guess NHL is team owned, but just for sake of argument, if the NHL was being sold for X, I don't know if it would raise the value of the AHL or ECHL if those still exist. Like, does it come down market or only the leader benefits?
I guess we're thinking about something that is kind of plausible. That if let's imagine WWE is bought at a high premium, like Vince's reported asking price of 9 billion, which is well above the market capitalization right now of 6.5 billion, right? Does that make let's say Impact, let's say Anthem wants to sell off Impact? Does that make Impact a lot more valuable? I can't think of a reason why it would, because the reason why WWE would be bought at a premium, the most believable reason to me, would be because sovereign wealth like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia want to own it, and they want to own it not just because it's a valuable sports like league, but because it would be part of a public relations strategy for the government to improve its image around the world. Does the fact of Saudi Arabia doing that in this hypothetical case, unless it's like another sovereign wealth actor like the Qataris interested in Impact, I don't see that happening though, just because they're much smaller brands, and what WWE offers in that way is a very recognizable American entertainment brand that I don't think any of the other wrestling companies really approaches. I guess like maybe AEW, but yeah, obviously the cons are not letting go of AEW anytime soon. So I'm skeptical.
So with AEW, we've heard announcements. They've gotten some deals over the air in the UK, but then there's like, okay, they have some deals with the Zone, some with Fight. Do you think to establish themselves internationally that they need more traditional exposure, or they can sort of get there with a Fight?
I think they need traditional exposure. I think they want it, right? I mean, we have the announcement of the deal with ESPN in Australia. It looks like not going to be airing live every week on ESPN because ESPN airs a lot of sports that will take precedent over AEW. But yeah, I think Fight is AEW Plus on Fight is a bridge to show international markets that, hey, this is one piece. And I'm sure they have other data, maybe digital data, YouTube data, things like that, to say, hey, look, we do this is what we do in your region, and if you have us on your network, we could do really well there too. But I think the road to success globally is still through to traditional TV, or if streaming platforms do bring a really strong reach. I'm not an expert in international media distribution, but if there's really strong streaming platforms to be on, then those may have a lot of value to AEW too. A lot of their international distribution is through WBD already throughout Europe, including networks like TNT Series. The one in France is another like Hanna-Barbera brand. I forget it. It's like Boomerang or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, a lot of that is already happening through WBD.
Right. And I think there's TNT Africa, but people were really like,
Yes.
making connections or whatever. Whereas WWE, which is on BT Sports now, it's going to be called TNT or something like that. And
Yes. Yeah.
right, like so. There's all of that. But interestingly, with Fight, and it surprised me. We talked about it last week with John. Um, as fairly shortly after AEW announced their traditional deal, I think it was what was it, the UK. Then Fight had like an announced, had a press release that the best way to watch AEW is on Fight, and it made me think about
This
like
was about Australia, yes, right?
Australia. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes.
So it was like, what's going on? Like, is AEW a good partner? Like, did people not talk? Usually, you say like, I would assume like, hey, even more ways to watch us in Australia this way. You could also watch us that way. The fact that Fight had to put out a press release like that, it just made me think.
I think what happened there. So if you look at the press release that AEW put out, they use the word exclusive, right? This is the word. This is our new exclusive partner in Australia and New Zealand and other Pacific Island regions. And on its face, it sounds like okay. So Fight, AW Plus on Fight is not happening anymore in those regions, but it still is. I don't know. I guess I imagine that, and Fight put out a press release right away. I mean, not right away, but like the next day or something like that. I got it, and I would think that they felt that there would be confusion among customers, right? To think that they're not going to be able to get AW Plus in their region anymore, but they're still going to be able to get that in their region. So I imagine that Fight was not happy about that, but. Yeah, that's what I know.
So staying in Australia, and my last question before turning it over to John, although I can talk about this all day with you, as you know. This hasn't been reported much, and it was behind the paywall, so I couldn't get all the details. But I got in my many Google alerts that Roger Cook, the current deputy premier of Western Australia, aims to make Perth the sports capital of Australia with a pitch to host WrestleMania. What do
Yes, I
you
saw
think
this in your
about that?
notes. Do you know what the publication is that reported this?
I will.
Because I did give it a Google search and I couldn't find anything.
Oh, okay. Let me see. I'll try and buy some time while we're talking to see if I can find it. But it just seems like so much more is being pointed towards Australia with wrestling. We had the promoter that apparently was working with Conrad on something there. We haven't heard anything since then, but it just seems like so much more news is coming out of like wrestling in Australia recently. Okay, so I found it. I'm going to put it in the StreamYard link here while we're talking.
Okay. I was just
Star
curious. It's okay. The
Starcast, yeah,
West.
Starcast with Connie and Nick Aldis and Mickey James.
Yeah, so it was interesting that a few months ago we had heard about that, but I know it takes time to plan it, but we didn't hear anything about this. And then suddenly this article from, now that I know, the West came out about, and I had to Google who this person was, but that they wanted to bid on it. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall, but the headline is there. Now, I
Yeah,
mean, I guess it begs a more like general question, meaning that, right, we just saw not just, but recent Clash at the Castle and so on, that there seems to be more flexibility for doing big shows other places. I'd imagine that if that was going to happen, would it happen in Saudi Arabia before Australia? Or maybe that's like too much of a spotlight on the WWE Saudi relationship, because I'd imagine like, okay, yes, you're giving us the greatest Royal Rumble, but give us WrestleMania. I remember watching that with Yokozuna, or whatever those rumors were that the Saudi prince likes the old WWE.
I'm sure the government would love to have WrestleMania in Riyadh. If they paid enough for it, it would make financial sense. As a wrestling fan, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see WrestleMania happen in serving a government that is involved in as many human rights violations as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is allegedly involved in. I think there would be a lot of media covering that and looking at that. But in the case of Australia, I mean, I remember that event in 2018, the what was it, the Showdown, Super Showdown, right? And I'm guessing from W's reporting at that time, where they reported a really high, revenue value in the other live events category, that they got some sort of subsidy for that or something like that. And that's definitely what they got for Clash of the Castle in Cardiff. I mean, that's what they want. They want to be attracted to go to, especially international regions, to to have the government, pay them extra to be there, with the value that they're giving you being, hey, look, we're helping your local market, we're helping the local economy with everything that's going on here, and there's a marketing value involved in that, and people are traveling to your country. I can't see many people traveling to Riyadh to go to WrestleMania, but I think we're going to see more of that, as for at least maybe like once a year, where Clash of the Castle was last year, in terms of seeing W try to get into these international markets where the government will give them a subsidy. And I think they see it as an opportunity to woo TV executives in the local market, to, especially when maybe a renewal of the media deals on the horizon, go there and, you of course bring, invite the executives and let them really see the event, and, give them the idea that W is a really valuable property to have.
Yeah, I mean, and not to compare one country to another just because it's in the same region, but Qatar, or Qatar, as people say, I still lean on Qatar for some reason. But it seemed like people traveled from all over the world, and just from my channels, people were like, "This is how you get kosher food," and like, just like you think it would be hard to get, and so on. So like, I think if people are so motivated to see something, that they'll go. But it was interesting to see, like, people coming from all over the world for that. John?
That's true, yeah.
When you look at like a WB sale, like we were talking about before, I know we're talking about WrestleMania all over the place. They are always having these big sellouts everywhere. It's the most money they made here, the most money they made there. Obviously, inflation has something to do with that as well, I'm sure. You said 6.5 billion. Vince is saying 9 billion. What are they really like? What are they really worth? Let's say Comcast buys them, right? They don't pay the 2 million or whatever it is for the TV rights. So would that make them worth less? If Fox doesn't re-up, what are they actually worth, do you think?
It's like, what is your house worth? What is your car worth? It's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And if there's more than one person interested in buying your house, it'll get sold for more than if there's just one. If there's 10 people interested in buying your house, you're gonna get a really good deal on your house probably. If there's 2 people, you get less of a good deal. If there's only one, you might have to sell it for less than market value. And I think I'm at the point in I guess predicting what's going to happen here, in that I don't think any major media conglomerate wants to buy this, because I think Vince wants too much for it I think Vince wants too much for it to give up control in exchange. I think maybe 9 billion is the number that he wants to give up control. And I don't think, maybe even that beside, I don't think that the major media conglomerates want to manage it, because it's a difficult business to manage successfully. And I think that they also see it as a risk to their brand, in that, if it's one thing to license TV rights from this company, it's another thing to be responsible completely for it. And the scandals that may be involved, even that, besides the perception of pro wrestling as a, kind of lowbrow fake sport. So I think it comes with costs that offset the value that it would bring to you. It'll allow you to put a cap on the sports rights that are continuing to escalate. So I think the only real players here is sovereign wealth, especially the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, maybe Endeavor in some sort of transaction. Endeavor is not big enough to acquire it outright, but maybe they would come up with some deal. And those are the only 2 that I think are really realistic right now. And I think there will be things that happen that like a bidding process that we'll get impressions of through public reports that have not happened yet, right? And I think in the coming months, that's either going to happen or it's not going to happen, and then the window to make this sale, at least at this time, if it's going to pass, will have passed, and they will have to move on to selling TV rights, which, it's one or the other at this juncture. You're either going to sell the company in the next 3 months, or it's springtime, and that's the time that we need to get these deals done that are so important to this company.
When you look at a lot of the things that are going on right now, like I was mentioning, the highest elimination chamber financially for them, this is the highest Royal Rumble for them. Is that inflation, or are they hot right now? Like how do you kind of judge that?
I don't know because we don't know the real numbers, right? I mean, we do know Royal Rumble did what, $7.7 million.
Yeah.
How far ahead is that of what the previous record was? Don't know. But WWE is definitely warming up, right? It's I think there was a big shift in the wrestling space between W and AEW in terms of what their momentum was. Obviously, W has always been way ahead of AEW in a lot of ways, but there was an increasing popularity in AEW, some good momentum with AEW, and that ended around the same time that it went in the opposite direction for WWE, which I think was on a popularity decline throughout that for the last several years, and it happened when Vince stepped down and when CM Punk went on his rant in Chicago. Those two events are like a month and a half apart, but that's roughly the time frame where it happened. And WWE has had better creative, I think, and that has proved that content to some degree matters, right? You have many guaranteed revenue streams, so it's kind of a foolproof business, kind of. But if you have better creative, wow, tickets sell a little bit better, and maybe merchandise sells a little bit better, and your TV ratings are a little bit better. And I think that's what we've seen in the last 5 months or so, especially these last few months. And it's even in year-over-year comparison. So you can't just chalk it up to, oh, look, it's WrestleMania season. I mean, look, January and February, at least for TV ratings, are better than they were last year. Ticket sales, we're in this weird space of ticket sales where, like, we finally have WrestleTix data that gives us actual event-by-event numbers that are pretty reliable. But we only have that since the return to touring in July 2021. So that's the entire timeline that I have to look at that I think are really reliable numbers to say, let's do a market-to-market analysis, cheap plug, which we just did on Patreon, and look at when WWE went to Montreal for SmackDown. How does that compare to the last time they were in Montreal for SmackDown, and so on. And a lot of those comparisons look very favorable for WWE. However, we are in Q1, where historically Q1 has done better than other quarters. So we can leave the jury out on that subject, on ticket sales. But on TV ratings, I think there's a clear success story here. And I think what helps WWE too is the increased reach of Peacock, which is distributing their peak events in more households than ever. And that started in 2021. And I think we started to see a leveling off of the popularity decline at that time. And I think we saw an increase in WWE's popularity from about 2014 to 2016 that coincides with the beginning of the WWE Network. And I think that's a really untold story in wrestling business, in that we've been taught by reading all these books about the territories and the 90s about how important stars are, which I do not mean to diminish how important stars are. But what is also important is distribution, how many homes you're in, and how many people are watching the product. And we can debate about whether or not cannibalizing pay-per-view is a good idea, but there was a popularity benefit that helped WWE, and it had downstream effects into other businesses like ticket sales and merchandise sales, maybe TV ratings.
Nice. Well said, Brandon. I know Lavie's got to jump off. He's got his call, but before we let you go, what's next for WrestleNomics as we say goodbye to Lavie? Lavie, thank you.
Thanks so much,
Bye,
Brandon.
Good to talk with you always. What's next? I don't know. I'm going to keep doing stuff. I'm going to keep reporting the wrestling business news. I'm really busy. One of the things that that Lavie was inviting me on for is because we've done this talk, I think, every year. I think this is the third time at this
Yeah.
time of the year,
Yep.
and I haven't done this is a exclusive I'm going to give you here. I haven't done a pro wrestling industry report for 2022, and at this point I don't know that I'm going to get one done. I was giving myself like the Observer Awards as a deadline, and those just came out this morning. So
Yeah. Yes.
so I've given myself a lot to do, and I enjoy it, but it's a lot to do. Yeah, and I could use some help, but like I don't exactly know where to find the people to give me the help. But yeah, hopefully we'll continue to grow this, and we'll continue to, I don't know, gain a bigger audience. I'll probably continue to go to more events. That's been a fun thing, to go to these events. I partly feel like I'm going there to ask like one or two questions, which is kind of funny. Like I'm driving
Yeah.
from Buffalo to Montreal to ask one
Yeah.
question, but I have a good time there too. And it's very interesting to meet other people. And I went to Newark, and I got to have a bagel with Lavie, and I got to meet a lot of other people too. So I know that's what we'll continue to do, and I'm very fortunate to I have a day job separate from this that makes money not that important. I mean, not that I'm not rich. Let's not get confused here, but like I don't have to make this work. I don't have to make WrestleNomics profitable and a growing business. I can. I have the luxury of being able to just do what I want and do what I think is good work. So that's what I'll continue to do until I lose my job anyway.
Where can everybody find WrestleNomics and your Patreon?
The Patreon is patreon.com/WrestleNomics. The website where you'll find everything else, including the Patreon, is WrestleNomics.com. And we're on Twitter, Instagram, at WrestleNomics. I'm on Twitter. If you want to send me a reply that I won't read, I'm on Twitter at Brandon Thurston.
You got to read them. Come on. Even though some of those reply, I mean, oh my God. Don't read them because you like, oh, I guess you like AEW again. Like after this week, like just the stupidest things
And I
that
understand.
make no sense. Yeah.
Well, I understand. And the thing is, like, WrestleNomics was started by Chris Harrington. It was a brand. I don't know if it was a business, but it was a name that he created.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And he now he works for AEW. So I understand the connection there, and that, I understand people feeling that way. And it's my job to be diligent in being transparent and avoiding conflicts in the future.
Yes. Were you happy, by the way, with the end of Elimination Chamber? Were you happy leaving the building that day?
I was trying to find a press conference at that time. My prediction was that Reigns was going to retain. It's a tough call, but I think that's what I was expecting to happen.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to end the 900-day title reign at a non-WrestleMania show. You know what I mean? It just feels like the guy held it for that long. I don't think it's going to be in a B show where he loses it. That's just my take.
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably, I don't know, is Cody going to take it from him? I'm guessing that he will. But I think they probably see, Cody as somebody who they want to put the title on more so than Sami Zayn. And then maybe you can have a Sami Zayn Cody match later too that way. I don't know.
If you go by the merch sales, I heard that Cody's kicking ass. So I don't know if that's a metric that they look at. If it is, I would think
I'm sure they look at it.
Yeah.
I'm
But I
sure
mean,
they
like
look at it.
that heavily, where it's like, oh, he's selling more
Do they-
merch.
do
Let's
they
go
weigh
with
it?
him. Yeah, I don't know if they weigh it with it, but I heard, and he even posted they sold out another merch. They sold out this, so he always mentions that they sell out his merch. So that's a good sign for heading into Mania, at least.
Yes, it seems like he's very interested in the business results of, especially at this time. This is it's kind of the peak of his career, right? So
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. But Brandon, thank you again for coming on. Really appreciate it. I know you've been on my show and you've been on this show 3 times, so really appreciate that.
Yes.
Thank you.
yes, it's great to be with you. I noticed the first time we talked, I was like, man, he sounds like he could be on NPR. He sounds like he should be hosting like an NPR show about like bird watching or something. It's a great voice.
Oddly enough, so weird. Matt Stryker, the announcer or whatever, he
Yeah.
said like the same thing to me. That's so
Did he?
weird. I was like, oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oddly enough, that's why I always liked
Interesting.
him. I was like, all right, Matt Stryker, you're on my good list for saying that. But,
Cool.
but thank you, appreciate that. Thank you for so much for all the time, though. Appreciate you coming on, and I know you're a busy man over at WrestleNomics.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.